Now, if you're listening on a tiny transistor radio, you probably didn't pick up on it, but that was a subtle remix of I Wanna Hold Your Hand. On November 6th, a new CD and double DVD and Blu-ray package hit the market called The Beatles 1 Plus. It's essentially a nifty new remix of the 27 tracks featured on the Beatles 1 compilation, released 15 years ago, but now packaged with 2 DVDs collecting nearly all of the Beatles' promo films, something fans have been clamoring for since the advent of home video. Here to discuss this package, we have an esteemed panel of Beatles authors and experts, beginning with Robert Rodriguez, who's a frequent guest on this program. He's also the author of the book Revolver, How the Beatles Changed Rock and Roll, among many other Beatles books. Robert, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ghosty. Great to be here.
And we're happy to have you. And joining him is Mitch Axelrod. He's the author of the book Beatle Tunes and also the co-host, one of the co-hosts, of the Beatles podcast Fab Four Free for All, and he was also on the show not too long ago. Mitch, welcome.
Hey, Ghosty, how you doing?
I'm doing good. And last, but certainly not least, making his debut on the show, he's the author of the book Beatles 101, and be on the lookout for his next book, Wings 101. I'm kidding, of course. It's Richard Buskin, who's also Robert's cohort on the Something About the Beatles podcast.
Hi there.
Oh, here we go.
You know, for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with the original 1 CD, I'd like to talk about that for just a moment. And that release came out in 2000, as I mentioned, and I remember at the time looking at the track listing and thinking, what purpose does this serve? Because you could just buy Past Masters Volumes 1 and 2 on CD and get the majority of this material, but I was proven wrong because it wound up becoming one of the best-selling catalog albums in history.
It was a marketing triumph because hanging it on the arbitrary criteria of number 1 hit singles from a band that was more than just hit singles makers, you know, it in one hand, it gave it something, an excuse to collect all these songs and put it in one 80-minute package. But on the other, it doesn't really well represent the whole of their career by any means.
It doesn't even represent all the number ones. You know, I mean, Please Please Me isn't on there because of the charts they were going off.
That's right.
Yeah, and to me, the good thing about it was that obviously a greatest hits, you said, you know, what purpose would it serve? But any grandmother or a young teenager whom the Beatles actually tried to market it to a lot, and it succeeded, any of those 2 demographics, along with baby boomers, walking into a store, seeing this album and turning it over, would pretty much know or have at least heard of every one of the songs on there and probably pick it up for someone they knew, if not themselves.
And then they come home and go, where's Here Comes the Sun?
Well, yeah, but it's called One, not Sun.
But And before we get into discussing the video aspect of this package, I want to focus on the CD for a moment, because when I heard that Giles Martin had gone in and remixed these tracks, I've been disappointed before by various remixes, so I wasn't expecting much, but I have to admit, not necessarily with the mono material, but when we started getting into the stereo stuff, I thought to myself, you know what? Remix the whole catalog if it's going to sound this good.
From what I understand, Giles Martin was basically, especially also with the 5.1 mixes, he was kind of reimagining where the Beatles would be when they were on stage, what their positions would be, and that's basically how he mixed it. I think he could have pushed it further, but he was playing it fairly safe.
I think after also the Yellow Submarine song track, where people got a glimpse of what could be with remixing, for better or for worse on some of those tracks, I think it made people a little anxious to maybe get, like you said, maybe the whole thing remixed, and One is definitely a good start.
It is a good start. We're not there yet, but, you know, just the act of trying to center the lead vocals and where they're double-tracked, spreading them across the stereo spectrum, you know, on either channel, was a good move. So you don't have those terrible mid-60s stereo mixes of the backing track on one side and the lead vocals out the other.
The other thing that people have to realize is that these aren't just remixes of, you know, the existing tracks. They've basically gone back and lifted stuff from the multi-track that you hear
Right.
different, things on certain songs. You'll hear, bass maybe, or, different guitars. It's like on 8 Days a Week, there are basically 4 different guitar parts that we've never heard before that come off the multi-track.
True. I asked each of you to pick out a specific track that you felt warranted discussion from this package, and let's start with Richard.
Well, I mean, if I can go to the video side, but in terms of talking about the audio,
Sure.
It would be Real Love.
Oh,
because as soon as I heard the opening, the keyboard opening, it just jumped out in a way that it isn't like that on the original mix. And then we've got different guitar fills from George, and John's vocal has been pulled back into the mix more, so that it kind of blends more with the George and Paul harmonies. It's like a totally different track.
And Richard, I'll give a different one, but I have to agree with you. The opening of that track with the acoustic guitar strum now, it makes the opening keyboard sound less of a demo because you do have a much more pronounced acoustic. And I think, I haven't A-B'd it yet, but I do think that there are different, I think it's either a different drum track or parts of a different drum track, just like George's fills, because there are some parts that, unless they brought it up way in the mix and now you can hear it differently, it sounds different, and I think you're right. I think it sounds like a completely different song. I think they did also slow it up just a touch.
Thank you. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, that's what Robert was saying. I think that it just makes it sound less as if John phoned in his vocal.
We're talking with Beatles authors and experts Mitchell Axelrod, Robert Rodriguez, and Richard Buskin about the new Beatles 1 package, picking out some of their favorite cuts. We just heard Richard's, and Mitch, you're up next.
Well, if we stay with the DVD, A Day in the Life comes off like a different track to me as well, because the orchestration, it's funny. I listen with my kids, and the orchestration, normally you can hear when that swirl comes, you can count in just like they do, 1, 2, 7, 8, 9. And this, I think they've built it up so that you lose track of your timing while you're trying to do that now, which is a good thing because it's a different experience. And then also, when the John part comes in, after Paul sings his part, it's beautiful. It's just it's a different experience for me. I don't know why, but when I listen in my car and I listen to that track, it just sounds gorgeous to me.
You're up next. What track stands out to you from these new remixes?
I would go with the aforementioned 8 Days a Week, just because, first of all, the visual with this video that they put together for this release is so compelling. It's Shea Stadium footage like you've never seen, off the camera negative. It's just beautiful. The colors are in full bloom. And it's so well edited to the rhythm of the song, and a bit of quick cutting, which normally I'm not crazy about, but because they do it so adroitly, matching up parts of obviously different songs to where they would occasionally have a match with the vocal. And just that it doesn't have the fade up. It gives sort of the illusion of how they would do it in performance mode if they actually played it live. So it starts at full volume. And it's got some kind of chicanery going on at the end where it's clearly they added some elements, possibly off the multi-tracks, to give it a big boom of an ending that it didn't have before. But that is another one that, like Real Love, the first time I heard it was like, wow, this is different. And certainly to its benefit.
That edit piece at the end is really interesting. It's breathed new life into it.
Yes, a round of applause for my 3 co-hosts this hour, Robert Rodriguez, Richard Buskin, and Mitchell Axelrod. We just heard Free as a Bird, the mix used on the Beatles 1 Plus CD and DVD package, which is what we're focusing on this hour. And Mitch, you wanted to ask a question.
We always say that, we question whether Real Love and Free as a Bird are, in air quotes, real Beatles songs in the canon, in the catalog. And we've done it on our show, too. We've questioned it. And on Free as a Bird, they've done a lot to that as well. George singing a different, lead, and I think John sounds less like he's in a tin can. But in regard to Real Love and Free as a Bird, I'm curious to hear what you guys think, because those are the only two songs on this whole collection that they've chosen to mess with. And when I say mess with, in terms of different instruments, different vocals. None of the others they've remixed and everything, but those two, curiously enough, are ones they chose to actually play with.
Those two were most in need of being played with, right? You know, they were created with 1994, 1995 technology, and it's advanced again, and I think we're hearing the results of the advances. The other thing is, George isn't around now, you know, so we don't have the Jeff Lynne sort of mix. You know, I think they've tried to veer away from the Jeff Lynne sound.
Yeah, they definitely de-Lynneized them, if that's a word. But, I mean, why would they change guitar licks and leads?
That's a curious thing, because there is precedent for this. When you look at the Who remaster series, where they were putting in different tones and guitar parts to existing albums, which really irritated me as a Who fan at the time, and they're curiosities, but they shouldn't replace the canon. With these, they occupy this sort of neither fish nor fowl place in the Beatles canon, so that might have been one reason why they felt they had leave to improve them. Another might be, you know, given the limitations of the technology 20 years ago and what they had to work off of in the first place, these cassette, you know, rough demos, they probably saw, well, with what we've got now, we can fix this and make, you know, John's lead vocal, particularly on Real Love, where every time he sings, that tape hiss comes up, you know, better integrated into the whole, and, you know, work with the technology they have now to improve the things. I mean, you know, when they did Beatles 1 in 2000, there were a few things that jumped out at me, such as the dropout that was always in Day Tripper right after the line Tried to Please Her,
right?
And they fixed that. You know, that kind of irritated me, because it wiped out some of the humanity that was there all that time, and my ears expect to hear it, quite frankly. So I can see where they didn't want to do too much to the original 60s masters, but maybe they thought they had a little bit more liberty to fix what were sort of hamstrung recordings to begin with. I don't know. That's just my conjecture.
I have to say that while the new George licks that we hear on Real Love, those fills, it's interesting, obviously, to hear something else that George contributed. I don't actually think they're an improvement. I don't think they work as well as the original fills. So I
agree with you. Aesthetically, They do jump out more. They sound more like he was sort of figuring out what he was going to play. I'm not sure why they did that. The John thing, I think they definitely improved the sound of the vocal and also the pitch as well.
So let's move on to the visual aspect of this package and talk about some of the promo films. Now, the four of us as Beatle collectors, we've seen these promo films over the years on crummy VHS tapes. This is the best quality we've ever seen them in, and as many times as I've seen them over the years, what I picked up on this time as I watched them one after another, this set could be retitled John and Paul, A Love Story, because it seems like in nearly every clip, they're shooting looks at each other and smiling and laughing, and it's almost like they're thinking, the other two guys, they're great, but you and me, pal, we own the world. How awesome are we?
Yeah. Hidden in plain sight all these years.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing them through fresh eyes, and it's really obvious the way they're kind of pitching woo at each other throughout this this series of promos.
Also, looking at some of those mid-'60s promos, I can't help but sort of think, John looks stoned here. Looking at it through that filter gives it a whole different slant again.
And how
compare and contrast to Ringo's commentary.
Let's not even get into that.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's funny because I guess we were fortunate, not to brag at all, but we were fortunate enough to see these at a presentation in New York, because I think they have one in London and they have one in L.A. And most people will sit down and watch, all 50. And it's great, believe me, it's nice. It gets a little tiresome if you see Day Tripper 3 times, but when you see them in little intervals, which is what I try to tell people to do, you see the joy that all four of them are having. Now, obviously, there's George and Ringo looking a little bored in some of them, but for the most part, you see the joy that all of them are having in all of these. The Beatles brought joy not only in their music, but in their music videos as well. And if you see them all at once, it just gets a little cumbersome. But in spurts, I think it really retains that fun and joy that they meant to bring to you, whether they wanted to or not.
Mitch, you want to be careful, or you'll spurt.
Thank you.
This is getting disgusting, this show. I'm glad, though, that they didn't include any radical re-edits of the promo films like they did on Anthology.
Watch these videos carefully. There are a few where they've inserted new segments.
Not as radically as Ghosty was saying with Anthology, but yes, they're still freshening up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Penny Lane has a few other shots, and there's still issues with some of the videos. And not to get negative, because I always tell people, be happy with what you have and not with what you don't have. But try telling that to a Beatle fan, and it's no use. But there's still a little bit of the I think they call it the interlacing. There's some things going on with the videos where when people are in the background, like Ringo and George, you see they start to flicker a little bit, and some of the distortion. So, is it perfect? No, but it's much, much better than anything we've ever had in the past.
The thing is, as well, they didn't have all of the masters for the videos. They had some, and, I think you can see the ones that they did have, like Penny Lane, which, looks absolutely incredible. But there are others where they had to reach out to different sources to get copies.
I'm a little...
Go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say, I was a little surprised that they resisted the temptation to colorize some of those Intertel ones.
What they did punch up were the colors on Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, which are really hot. The reds.
Yes.
It's like made for an acid trip, basically.
I'll go try that after the call. Now, the one thing that I did notice, though, there are two videos that I'm kind of disappointed in. The first one is Something, because Something looks much, much better. Believe me, they showed the original master, and it was horrible. But I think there's a point where you overproduce it, and you like in Photoshop, if you go one further to try to sharpen the picture, it actually makes it worse and makes it even grainier. And I think that's what happens with Something. It's a little too sharp, and it doesn't look as good to me as maybe it could have looked. I don't know. I'm not a technician.
I'd agree with you, Mitch. I was disappointed. What it does is it brings out the grain of the 16-millimeter film.
Yeah.
It wasn't on 35, and I agree. I was a bit disappointed with that.
The clarity reveals the seams.
Yes. And the other thing is Please Please Me from Sullivan, which I won't even get into why they had to use that, but it seems fast to me. And
It is.
On the Sullivan show, they performed it in a different key to the record, and they tried to adjust it to the same key. They sped it up.
It was like they're tuned down a half step.
Yeah.
What about A Hard Day's Night? Someone told me, and this maybe is just rumor, but I cannot hear it. I think I do. Someone told me that the Paris version of A Hard Day's Night, which is live, someone said that Giles flew in the solo and the organ from the solo into that live mix.
I had the same thought.
They did a lot of flying in of stuff for that live footage.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Because actually the drop-in performance of She Loves You, they flew that in from one of the Sullivan performances.
Yeah, Miami.
Really?
They didn't substitute the whole thing. They actually used, like, Pro Tools and, to fly in certain parts. So I think it's got, like, a new bass part on it that comes from the Sullivan show. They were able to isolate, even though it's like, we're working with mono stereo stuff. Yeah, they were able to isolate certain parts and replace.
Wow, now they did what we typically call outfakes.
Don't tell anybody.
I won't. Well, does anybody listen to this show?
Very few. Before we go, because we're going to be running out of time here, let's talk about the video for Come Together.
We have to.
It's Grand Theft Beatles. What the heck is this thing?
Well, it was created in 2000 for the original Beatles 1 release, back when that was considered cutting-edge computer animation technology. And, it was on the shelf. They had it. And a few people had seen it. why not use it? Must have been their thought process. I'm sure among the group gathered here, we're familiar with those underground DVD releases of the Beatles promo films, Volume 1 and 2 that have been in circulation.
Right.
And for Come Together, they had cobbled together that it was like a fan's home movie footage, 8mm footage taken outside the EMI studios at Abbey Road in the summer of '69. And they made a perfectly serviceable, period-appropriate visual to accompany that song. What else they could have done using the Ian McMillan other shots taken that day, some of the stuff that was taken at Tittenhurst a couple weeks later. They could have produced a really nice video for, bookending the Beatles' career for Come Together. And
the pictures that we've now seen, which have come out in the past, 2 or 3 or 4 years, of Linda and Yoko in the bed and John and Paul recording at the mic. There's now probably 15 to 25 of those, and they could have easily put together some sort of montage. Lord knows Apple has other photos that they could have easily put together some sort of montage. I just think it looks very lazy.
Yep.
Well, you use the word lazy, Mitch. Before we go, we have got to apply that also to the bonus features with Paul and Ringo. I mean, it goes beyond lazy with their own product. And, you'd think that for posterity, they would make the effort to give us some really good, insightful, narratives on a bunch of videos, instead of which we've got a handful. And most of it, especially Paul, is like a play-by-play telling us what we're watching.
It's sad because you get a picture of Ringo at his computer, and that to me was ridiculous too. And he's like, "There I am, look at that face. There I am, and I'm on a horse now." Well, I can see that. That's very nice, and I'm happy he's happy. But I don't think they remember any of that, to be honest. I mean, Paul's commentary is so boring because it's like you said, he probably just watched the video again an hour prior and tried to come up with something to say for 3 minutes.
Well, in fact, Mitch, I don't think he watched it prior, because there's some parts where he's going, "Oh, look at that." It's as if this is the first run-through, and that's it. It comes over as if both of them have said, "You've got an hour, and that's all I'm giving you," which is incredible.
Well, I think that's probably what happened.
Yeah, unbelievable. With their own product. For posterity, this is what's going to be there for years to come. Just incredible arrogance. What they should have done is put Paul by a campfire or on a boat, and then he would have been able to.
Or as I always say, hang gliding, as he's recounting his memories of Strawberry Fields.
I also wish there was Easter eggs on this, because they, when we were in the screening, I said to them, "Listen, you're going to get people who are going to say, now that we have all these, maybe on can we in the future, will you release other videos like on iTunes that you didn't get on this?" Obviously, it would be a nice revenue stream for the Beatles, but you could have easily put one more or two more as Easter eggs on this and satisfied everybody. And it wouldn't matter, because people would be like, "Oh, that's just a bonus anyway. That's cool."
Right. The Dartmouth Help comes to mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
gentlemen. We have to wrap it up here. But I don't want to. I don't want to give anyone the false impression. I think we're all recommending this set.
Yeah.
Final thoughts from everybody. To start with Richard.
Yeah, I have to say that we've been, because what makes the discussion interesting is to sort of pick holes and say where we have problems with it. But I have to say, I actually give this 10 out of 10. I think they've done a fine job. It's beautifully packaged. Disappointed with the sleeve notes. They're not explanatory at all about the videos. But that said, I think the graphics are beautiful, and they've done a great job. I think they've tried to go out of their way to please the fans and also please the general public. That's not easy to do, to strike that balance. I think they've done it really well.
Robert?
I think I would have been satisfied if they put out a DVD accompaniment, which some iterations have, that is just the promo films to accompany the songs that are on the CD. I could accept that and think that's fine. Well, maybe next time they'll put out the rest. Instead, they made available all this work they did on all these other songs. They had these beautiful promo films shot, plus, other versions of some of the same songs. So to me, they already went well and beyond what they've done normally in the past for the fans. So kudos to them. Yeah, we can nitpick and say what they overlooked or what could have been better, but on the whole, what is there to complain about?
And Mitch?
I would agree with both of the other gentlemen. I really feel that for the first time in a long time, and this was a very big surprise announcement when they made this, but I feel like the first time in a long time, Apple really did it right and tried to cater to the hardcore as well as the mass audience. And I got to tell you, I've said it before, I really think that up to now, this might be the most important release that the Beatles have put out. I just think it's that good. They've done a great job. Yes, it's easy to nitpick, but I give it a 10 out of 10 also. And I just think if you're a Beatle fan, or even not a Beatle fan, I think this is essential watching and listening.
Mitch, where can we hear Fab 4 Free For All?
You can hear it on archive.org. You can hear it on iTunes, and you can go to our site, fab4all.com, and you can hear myself, Rob, and Tony do exactly what we're doing now, saying pretty much nothing. No, I'm kidding.
And Robert and Richard, something about the Beatles. Where could people go to discuss? Well, first of all, that it's become a weekly show. Where do people go to find that out?
It is on somethingaboutthebeatles.com as well as iTunes, and we're also on Facebook.
Once again, my guests have been Mitchell Axelrod, author of the book Beatle Tunes and one of the co-hosts of Fab 4 Free For All. Robert Rodriguez, he's the author of Revolver, How the Beatles Changed Rock and Roll, as well as many other Beatle books, along with his co-host on his podcast, Something About the Beatles. Richard Buskin, the author of Beatles 101 and many other books about the Fab Four and other topics of interest. Thanks so much, guys, for being on the show and discussing this collection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Happy holidays.